There are worlds in the galaxy that are so utterly hostile, so violently alive, that even the bravest explorers dare not step foot on their soil. Zornia is one such world. Imagine a place where every living thing, plant, animal, microbe wants you dead, not figuratively, not passively. I mean, in a very literal, very visceral, very teeth and claws kind of way. Everything on Zornia hunts, everything fights, everything survives by dominating, consuming, or outlasting everything else. We, the Amia Science Consortium, knew better than to send personnel into such an ecosystem. We'd seen the images captured from orbit, watched the probe footage that always seemed to cut out too soon. Not because of technical failure, no, the equipment was always in top shape. It just didn't survive the surface. Zornia eats machines, like snacks, chews through metals and ceramics with a ferocity that defies reason. We watch drones vanish into thick jungles of crawling vines and emerge seconds later as nothing but chewed scrap and splinters. So we studied from afar, from the safety of the stars, and still, even then, we lost assets. Probes were shredded, sensor arrays melted by chemical fogs, cameras devoured by bioluminescent flying things with serrated wings and no fear of technology. It quickly became clear, Zornia was not merely dangerous, it was biologically aggressive. Violently so. Initially, the plan was to burn away a section of flora and build a sealed research outpost. We'd done this on other high-risk worlds. Mian 4, Kuya, even Namar Prime. Torch a patch of hostile wilderness, pave it, and drop a reinforced dome on top. Simple, right? But Zornia was different. We found ourselves at war not just with wildlife, but with the land itself. The plants didn't just grow back, they retaliated. They regrew faster than anything we'd seen. Burned ground sprouted fresh tendrils into days. In one case, we sterilized a zone with plasma beams and came back 48 hours later to find vines already reaching for the sky. In another, roots had dug deep into the soil, so deep that complete sterilization required blasting down to the bedrock. Even then, some of the flora tunneled under the scorched layers, erupting days later in defiance. And the animals, gods, the animals, they weren't just survivors, they were siege engineers. They tunneled through walls, gnawed through reinforced composite plating, bypassed sensor grids with eerie coordination. One probe dropped in by parachute was found shredded within minutes, its black box jammed with mucus and bits of chewed circuit boards. After 3 failed surface attempts and significant equipment loss, the consortium classified Zornia as Grade 12, extremely hazardous. Surface exploration was officially deemed impractical, unwise, lethal. And then, of course, humans showed up. They always do. We warned them, gave them the data, showed them the videos, the casualty projections, the heat-mapped regions of certain death. Their response? Thanks. We'll be careful. They weren't joking. They sent a team. We expected disaster. Braced for it even. Had an automated rescue pod fueled and waiting. Watched their descent with the somber anticipation of a funeral procession. But something odd happened. They didn't die. Not a single one. Their team landed, conducted a full survey, collected samples, and returned without a scratch. No fatalities, no breakdowns, no injuries worth noting. We were stunned. So they went again, and again, and again. No casualties, no losses, not even a damaged suit. We couldn't understand it. Zornia killed everything. That was its nature, its defining trait. The planet itself seemed to resent visitors, but humans endured, survived, thrived even. We reviewed their equipment specs. Inferior to ours by almost every metric. Less armored, less durable, less sophisticated. Their tech shouldn't have lasted 5 minutes down there. Our own designs had failed spectacularly. So how? We had to know, but the consortium has rules. We couldn't give the humans our scanners, not without violating several interstellar treaties. And we couldn't send drones to follow them. That would risk offense. Humans are notoriously touchy about being spied on. There was only one viable solution, a joint expedition. We'd ask to go with them. Ask, beg really. Not a comforting thought. Approaching a race of apex predator bipeds with carnivore eyes and a reputation for unpredictable violence. Just to ask if we could tag along on their next death march into the galaxy's most hostile jungle. But the academic potential was irresistible. So we drew lots, and I was selected. I still don't know whether I won or lost that lottery, My colleagues insisted that only one of us needed to supervise the equipment. No point risking multiple lives. Very logical, very cowardly. Bastards. I considered backing out several times, but the truth was, this was it, my chance, my moment. Careers were made from less, and even if I came back with nothing but bruises and PTSD, I'd still be the first Amia to walk on Zornia. That meant something. That mattered. So I agreed. The humans accepted our proposal with surprising enthusiasm. They even seemed pleased, like they were eager to be acknowledged by the wider scientific community. Understandable, I suppose. It's not easy being the new species in the galaxy. Always scrutinized, always underestimated. Of course, we didn't tell them we were studying them as much as the wildlife. That was implied. They were clear though. They couldn't promise my safety. They would try. Their security protocols were robust. But Zornia was Zornia. I nearly backed out again, but I didn't, because I'm a scientist, and because if I didn't go, I'd always wonder what I missed. The human vessel was crude by Amia standards. Functional, industrial, no elegance, no poetry, but solid, reliable, and most importantly survivable. As I boarded, my hearts pounded like they were trying to escape my chest. Every instinct screamed to flee, but I didn't. I introduced myself, politely, formally. I was determined to make a good impression, and to my surprise, they weren't monsters. Some were even friendly. There were 21 humans on the expedition crew. 4 of them introduced themselves to me immediately. Doctors Reed, Cage, Wee, and Bowman. They were surprisingly welcoming, courteous, curious. They wanted to make sure I was comfortable, that I had what I needed. I appreciated that. It helped ease the suffocating anxiety crawling inside my suit. The rest of the crew was different. They didn't speak to me, didn't even look in my direction. Their movements were crisp, sharp, purposeful. Their eyes scanned hallways and hatches like predators expecting an ambush. It wasn't rudeness. Exactly, it was focus. Like they didn't see me as a guest, or even an annoyance. I was simply irrelevant to their objective. One of them did acknowledge me though. Briefly, Grace Mackenzie, leader of the expedition. She walked like a mountain carved into muscle and nerves. Calm, solid. Her face bore scars, real ones, the kind that didn't get smoothed out for vanity. One of her eyes was synthetic, glowing faintly with mechanical precision. But it was the other one, the real one, that unnerved me. Cold, piercing. It looked through things, through people, through me. She greeted me with a nod, said I was to follow her instructions at all times, no exceptions. Not for my safety, she said, but for the safety of the entire team. Her tone didn't allow questions. I understood. I nodded. I wondered then if she was talking about the native predators, or about herself. Our descent plan was unconventional. Instead of unloading the surface vehicle after landing, we'd be riding down in it. The rover was slung beneath the shuttle's undercarriage, like a mechanical egg waiting to drop. It was massive, 3 compartments, a heavily armored cabin in the front, flanked by 2 enormous trailers behind it. The wheels alone were taller than me. Each segment bristled with reinforced plating and thick, scuffed armor that told stories I didn't want to know. This thing wasn't just built for exploration. It was built for war. 2 of the humans, the silent ones in black suits, helped strap me into the specially modified seat. It was custom built for Amia physiology, with secure restraints to keep my limbs and wings from flailing. A thoughtful gesture, or maybe a necessary precaution. There were 20 seats in the forward trailer, and 2 more in the cabin. I assumed those were for the pilots. All of the humans wore full body suits. Mine too was sealed and pressurized. The air on Zornia was technically breathable, but that didn't mean much. We weren't worried about oxygen, we were worried about spores, microbes, invisible horrors with fangs too small to see. I noticed something else. Some of the suits were white, some black. All were bulky, armored. But the black ones were different, denser, heavier. The white-suited humans were the researchers, I guessed. Scientists like me. The black-suited ones, they were something else. Soldiers, maybe. Security detail. Or perhaps something even more specialized. Even Mackenzie wore a black suit. That disturbed me. Before I could dwell on it too long, we launched. The descent was rough. Human transport systems lacked the gravitational dampeners of Amia craft, so I felt every jolt, every lurch, every bone-shaking bounce. The trailer had no windows, only the distant hum of mechanical life and the occasional creak of metal under strain. Still, I wanted to see. I activated my uplink and accessed the external cameras. The image that filled my visor stole my breath. We were descending through the clouds over the eastern massif. A sunlit ridgeline, longer than a continent and sharper than any blade, stretched across the horizon like a scar on the world. Shadows spilled down its jagged face, casting mountainous teeth across the jungle below. The forest writhed in slow motion, not swaying, not rustling, writhing. Like it was alive, like it was watching. When we landed, the rover shuddered so hard my restraints creaked. Seconds later, the shuttle detached, igniting its engines and roaring back into orbit. We were alone, just a few dozen fragile bodies, sealed in armor, parked on the skin of a world that hated all life not born in its soil. We'd landed on rocky ground, mostly clear of vegetation. But even here, vines slithered between the cracks, probing, searching, testing. I watched one move toward the rover's wheels and recoil from the heat. Two black-suited humans unstrapped and climbed out through top hatches. Hidden, turrets deployed, scanning the terrain. They weren't cameras. They were guns. Heavy ones. We began to move. The rover lurched into motion, climbing over jagged stone and descending into the dense vegetation. Zornia's plant life doesn't grow like forests back home. There are no towering trees or high canopies, no shade to hide beneath. Instead, the floor consists of tightly packed shrubs and vines, low to the ground, but absurdly aggressive. They don't grow tall, they spread wide. They devour anything in their path. Competing roots don't just displace, they strangle, choke, tear. Most plants form low mounds or pyramids, only a few meters high but several across. Each defends a clearing around it with roots so voracious that nothing else can grow. These dead zones form natural paths, winding corridors of bare mossy ground between writhing towers of greenery. That's how we traveled, crushing moss under the rover's tires, following paths not made by trails or animals, but by the hostile equilibrium of plant warfare. The downside? You can't see more than a few meters ahead. No tall trees means no overhead view, no canopy, no scouting from above. The sky may be clear, but in these forests, visibility is a myth. You could have a predator crouch 5 meters away and never know until it was already chewing your leg, unless you had a scanner. We brought one, our contribution to the joint expedition. A biothermal scanner capable of detecting bioelectric fields. Zornia's fauna doesn't give off reliable heat signatures. Too cold-blooded. Their temperatures match ambient conditions perfectly. Human thermal imaging is useless here. But Amia tech can sense life by its nerve activity. 40 meters of detection range. Enough, hopefully. One of the black suits carried the scanner. I kept an eye on the readings through my uplink. The rover rumbled onward. Even at low speed, the ride was miserable. We Amia never developed wheeled transport. Our early technologies focused on flight gliders, hovercrafts, aerial lifters. Cars and trucks came later, as curiosities. The bouncing, the shaking. It felt like being stuffed into a metal can and tossed down a mountain. Doctor, we assured me this was the smoothest ride possible. I didn't believe him. Still, I endured. Our first destination, a cave system identified by orbital scan. A year prior, a drone had approached the entrance and been torn apart by a swarm of flying creatures before it got within 50 meters. This time, we had armor. This time, we had firepower. This time, we had humans. As we crept closer to the cave, the tension inside the rover thickened. The cave loomed ahead like the open mouth of some ancient beast, fossilized mid-roar. The rover rolled to a halt just beyond a thicket of jagged rocks, its wheels grinding against stone. According to our scans, this was as close as we could safely get without risking damage to the chassis. The terrain beyond was too uneven for wheels, even ones this massive. The entrance gaped at us, wide and black, 5 meters tall at least, fringed with stalactites like curved ivory teeth. It was a place sculpted by time, erosion, and the relentless will of biology. It didn't welcome us. It dared us. We sent in a drone first. Of course, it was smaller than I expected. Light, fast, unarmed. It buzzed through the opening like an insect and vanished into the shadows, its camera feed transmitting to our suits in real time. Inside, the cave was alien in every sense of the word. Bioluminescent moss coated the walls in patches, casting soft glows in pale blue and violet. Strange fungi, tall and thin, with caps like open palms, grew from the damp floor. They pulsed faintly. It was difficult to tell whether they were reacting to the drone's presence or if that gentle movement was simply part of their biology. No immediate signs of predators. That didn't comfort me, Dr. Bowman noted that the mushroom-like flora bore an uncanny resemblance to earth fungi, non-photosynthetic, spore-releasing organisms that thrived in decay. I'd read about them in human databases, but the resemblance was eerie. Convergent evolution, perhaps? Or something stranger? The team prepared to move. This was the part I had feared most. Leaving the safety of the rover, I kept reminding myself of our advantages. We had the scanner. We had armor. We had a full detachment of humans trained for this kind of thing. The plan was simple. Go in, collect a few samples, document the flora, then leave. Quick, precise, controlled. Still, my limbs trembled. There was no debate over the order of exit. None of the polite squabbling one might expect from an Amia research team vying for observational honor. The humans had already determined everything. Every role, every position, every formation. 6 black suits formed the vanguard. Then came the researchers, the 4 white suits, and myself. Another 5 black suits followed behind, locking us into a tight, well-defended core. The remaining 6 stayed with the rover, manning the turrets, monitoring systems, ready to extract us if needed. Mackenzie approached me before we disembarked. Stay in the center, she ordered. I nodded. Also, don't use your flight system unless absolutely necessary. That caught me off guard. I was the only one with a flight-capable suit. My wings, protected beneath flexible shielding, could unfurl in emergencies. But using them here, especially inside a cave, was suicidal. She didn't elaborate. She didn't have to. Her voice said everything. We exited the rover through the rear hatch. The moment my feet hit Zornia's soil, real, living, breathing Zornian earth, I felt the weight of it. The air was heavy, not just in composition, but in presence. It felt aware, as if the very atmosphere watched us, judged us. The black suits moved with eerie synchronicity. Without a word, they spread into a defensive arc, weapons raised. I couldn't tell whether it was rehearsed or instinctual. Probably both. It was almost inhuman, smooth, unnerving. Above us, 2 small drones hovered. They looked inadequate, lightweight, unarmed, or so I thought. Their frames hummed softly, barely audible, like sleeping predators breathing in the dark. The cave's entrance was closer now. Stalagmites jutted from the floor like broken spears. The interior grew darker, the light from the outside fading into gloom. Our suit lamps flicked on, casting harsh beams through the rising mist. And then, I nearly fell. A misstep, a slick patch of bioluminescent slime. I would have crashed hard onto my shoulder if one of the black suits hadn't caught me. He grabbed my arm mid-stumble and steadied me with practiced strength. I turned to thank him. He nodded once, the barest acknowledgement, and resumed scanning the shadows. I tried to make conversation. It was awkward. I asked his name. Velasquez, he said. I asked about his field, his studies, his research. He blinked, then said nothing. It wasn't that he didn't understand. He simply didn't care. I was a guest. He was a guardian. That was the relationship. Nothing more. We moved deeper. The air turned cooler, thicker. Tiny creatures no more than a few grams in weight fluttered in and out of the glowing mushroom caps. Some glowed themselves, like sparks of life flickering between fungal chimneys. We collected samples carefully, methodically. The humans used tools I couldn't identify: rods with flexible heads, jars with vapor seals, canisters that hissed when opened and closed. I contributed too. My own sampler, a simple tube with chemical sensors, drew material from the soil and offered preliminary analysis. Nothing groundbreaking, but enough to tell us this ecosystem was like nothing we'd cataloged before. Then we noticed something hanging from the ceiling. More lights, but not mushrooms. These were alive. One of the fluttering insects drifted too, close to a light, and something moved, fast, a blur, a twitch in the dark, snap, gone. We zoomed in with the drone. It was a predator, small, 20 centimeters in length. Its body hugged the ceiling, anchored by 8 pairs of jointed legs. Its torso was split into dual thoraxes, each braced for grip. A long, flexible tail extended outward, tipped with a glowing lure. It didn't attack. It waited. When prey approached, it struck its head, flinging downward, oral sphincter expanding like a flower blooming in reverse, and enveloping the tiny, Flyer in one smooth gulp. Gruesome, elegant, deadly. We named it ZCO-83. We tried dislodging one for a sample. The drone nudged gently. Nothing. It was fused to the ceiling like barnacle to hull. We kept moving. That was when the scanner beeped. Sharp, repetitive, urgent. Something was in the cave with us. Something bigger than the flyer eaters. Bigger than anything we'd seen so far. ZCO-83 was too small to trigger the scanner unless in massive numbers. This was different. This was large. It was moving toward us. Suddenly, the black suits stopped scanning the floor. They raised their rectangular devices, and I understood. They weren't scanners. They were weapons, all of them. We began to retreat. Carefully. Slowly. In formation. I glanced at the ceiling. ZCO-83 had retracted their tails, pulled their heads beneath armored shells. Their lights vanished like stars behind clouds. They were hiding. They sensed something worse was coming. That was all I needed to know. A flicker of motion. Something darted behind a stalagmite 20 meters away. Then another blur on the wall. Fast. Too fast. The scanner tracked it. 15 meters now. I tried to steady my breathing. 10. Then it attacked. A shadow launched itself from the side. Long. Fast. It soared toward us. Jaws open. 4 mandibles stretching wide. Then explosion. Light. Sound. My visor flashed white. Pain stabbed through my ears even with the dampeners. The predator disintegrated mid-leap, torn apart by a salvo of kinetic energy. Ichor sprayed the walls. Pieces scattered. Chunks of meat rained down like confetti at a funeral. The black suits didn't flinch. They turned, swept the cave with their weapons, ready for more. There was no more. The creature had died before it hit the floor. 2 of the suits approached, scanning the remains. Their lamps revealed what was left. 2 meters long, X-shaped mouth, fangs the size of my hand, no eyes, no belly, no back. It could run on any surface, wall, ceiling, ground. 8 legs, equally jointed, no front, no weakness. But it was dead, very, very dead. I stared at its remains. I would not have survived that, not even close. Even in my suit, it would have torn through me like cloth. And the humans, they barely reacted. One of them muttered, just a small one. Small, doctor. Reed was ecstatic. A new species, new genus. ZCO-84, another name for the archives, another nightmare for the memory. One of the black suits hoisted the corpse over his shoulder, like it weighed nothing. I realized then that the predator Zornia's apex, the killer of drones and destroyer of steel, was lighter than the average human, and against humans, it never stood a chance. We left the cave in silence. The broken body dripping ichor behind us. Humans, 1, Zornia, 0. The trail of ichor left by the predator smeared itself into the moss as we made our way back toward the rover. It shimmered under our lamps, dark and viscous, almost oily in its glint. I couldn't stop staring at it, not because of the gore, but because it made something terrifyingly clear to me. The planet had thrown something at us, something fast, something strong, something adapted to this world's brutality. And yet, it died so quickly, so definitively, that its death didn't even register as danger to the people around me. I was still shaking. The humans were already discussing cave formations and mushroom DNA. We boarded the rover again in silence. No one spoke of the kill. No celebration, no commentary, no lingering dread. The black suits moved with their usual methodical precision, wiping their gear down, checking ammo clips, resetting scanner thresholds. Routine, as if they'd done this 1,000 times before. Maybe they had. Grace Mackenzie was the last to climb aboard. She passed me without a glance. Just the faint creak of her armor, the faint hiss of her suit depressurizing as she entered the interior cabin. She sat across from me, silent, still, a sentinel in human skin. I swallowed dryly. Doctor. We leaned toward me as the rover resumed movement. His voice came through my suit's channel, soft, cheerful, completely at odds with the moment we had just endured. Fascinating creatures, aren't they? Fascinating? I looked down at the sample case, resting across my lap. Inside were biological slivers from the cave floor, fungus, moss, insects, the beginnings of a thesis. But no data would ever fully capture what we had just seen. Yes, I said, my voice thin. Fascinating. I watched the feed from one of the drones as it flew overhead. It surveyed the cave mouth from above, then turned back toward the forest. canopy where the rover was now moving again, slower this time, more cautiously. I began to reflect on something I hadn't dared think during the initial journey. What made humans different? What allowed them to not just survive on Zornia, but to dominate it? It wasn't just their tools. Their weapons were powerful, yes, but power wasn't enough. Zornia didn't fear strength. It devoured strength, crushed it beneath evolution's heel. No, what separated humans was something else. They adapted. Not in generations, not in centuries, in real time, moment by moment. The black suits weren't just trained, they were transformed. They moved like a collective nervous system. Their weapons weren't just powerful, they were reflex extensions of thought. And their leadership wasn't just strategic, it was predatory in its patience and precision. I remembered something I'd once read in a human military journal: hard times create hard men. I used to think that was a dramatic flourish. Now, it felt like prophecy. Zornia was a death world. No one disputed that. But humans came from one too. Maybe not as biologically active, maybe not as overtly hostile, but it was a world of scarcity, competition, struggle, ice ages and megafauna, volcanoes and plagues, war and famine. And from that crucible came these people, not invincible, but unrelenting. The rover jostled as we rolled over a root, an enormous tendril thicker than my torso, pulsing faintly with green fluid just beneath its bark. One of the black suits fired a burst of plasma into it. The root recoiled with a wet hiss. We passed over it seconds later, the moss beneath curling in reaction. Why did you do that? I asked over the comm. The suit didn't respond. Dr. Cage answered for him. Zornian vascular roots react to motion. It was reaching for the tires. Reaching, not by accident, not by instinct. By intent. I sat back. There was no underestimating this planet, and yet, the humans didn't underestimate it. They didn't even underestimate themselves. They moved with a constant awareness that death could come from anywhere, any angle, any moment. But they didn't flinch. They didn't panic. They just moved forward. We traveled another several kilometers that day, collected more samples, analyzed spore density in the air, detected chemical signals exchanged between plants, observed a series of insect colonies built from crystallized resin that mirrored the same patterns found in termite mounds on Earth. And through it all, I noticed something I hadn't paid attention to before. The black suits weren't just watching the wild, they were watching us, me, the scientists. Anytime one of us moved too far from the group, a black suit drifted closer. Not obtrusive, not confrontational, just near, present. At first, I thought it was security protocol. But then I saw Mackenzie subtly signal one to reposition. A tiny hand motion, barely a flicker, and the suit moved without hesitation. The chain of command wasn't written. It was embedded, like instincts layered into the body. At one point, while collecting a rare flowering growth that only bloomed in shadow, I knelt too close to a fungal node. It twitched barely. I would have missed it entirely, but a black suit was already beside me, gently pulling me back before I even noticed. The node uncoiled behind me, revealing tiny spikes coated in viscous gel, toxins, likely. Dr. Bowman, who'd observed the interaction, simply said, "They've memorized the danger signs." A twitch, a scent, a shift in light. Their minds track it all. But how? I asked. She smiled. "They've lost people." The words hit harder than I expected. They weren't guesses. They were experience. I looked again at Mackenzie, still silent, still watching, not emotionless. I realized, grieving, but in a way that had been transformed into command. That was the other thing about humans. They carry their dead with them, not in ceremony, but in readiness. Every step they take on Zornia is haunted by the ones who didn't come back. And that's why they survive, because they never forget, and they never hesitate. That night, we camped on a flat rock shelf beside a cliff, surrounded on three sides by forest. The rover formed the perimeter. Drones floated overhead. Spotlights painted the trees in white. Inside, the air was warm and thick with recycled filtration. I sat across from Dr. Reed in the rear trailer. He was cataloging samples with a speed that belied the day's fatigue. "Do you ever get used to this?" I asked. He paused. "Zornia?" "No," I said. "The way they move, the black suits, the knowing." He nodded. "No, but you stop being surprised by it." "Are they soldiers?" He shook his head. "Not really, not officially. Most of them have science backgrounds. Some are medics, some engineers. Then what are they? He thought for a moment, then gave me an answer I'll never forget. They're what we become when surviving isn't enough anymore. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. The night on Zornia doesn't fall gently. It doesn't dim like the skies on homeworlds you'd describe with poetry. It drops sudden and heavy like a curtain falling between predator and prey. Light doesn't fade here. It vanishes. One moment, the forest is visible in hues of crimson and violet. The next, it's black, pitch, complete, and then the sounds begin. Hisses, clicks, low vibrating groans that resonate in your bones and whisper to your instincts, telling you that somewhere out there, just past your vision, something ancient is awake, and it's hungry. I lay inside my secured sleeping cell in the forward trailer of the rover, trying to rest. But Zornia does not allow peace. You don't sleep here. You endure the night. You hope for the next sunrise. The metal around me creaked as something brushed against the outside hull, a scratching. Slow, deliberate. It stopped after a moment. No alarms triggered. No one reacted. I realized the humans had heard it too. They just didn't flinch. Because whatever it wasn't enough of a threat yet. That shook me more than the sound itself. At some point during the night, I drifted into a shallow sleep, and then I woke to light. Emergency crimson flooded the interior of the rover. Klaxons pulls faintly, not loud, but urgent. I stumbled out of the sleeping cell, still inside my suit. My HUD lit up with notifications. Perimeter breach. External threat. I thought we were under attack. Then I realized we already had been. By the time I entered the central cabin, the black suits were already outside, Mackenzie among them. The white suits were huddled near the inner wall, voices low, tense. What happened? I asked. Doctor. We didn't answer. He just motioned for me to look at the external camera feed. I did, and saw nothing. Just vines. Miles of vines, all writhing, moving, in unison. A wave of green and black, sweeping toward the camp like a flood, like a living tide. Not just plants, hunters. That's when I finally understood. Zornia didn't send lone predators. It waited, watched, then it tested. That creature in the cave ZCO-84, it wasn't the main threat. It was a scout, a probe, and now the forest was coming. Not beasts, not animals, but the land itself. The biology of this place didn't distinguish between tree, parasite, fungus, beast. Everything moved, everything hunted, everything communicated. They were coming for us. The humans responded instantly. The turrets activated, scanning targets, firing. Flames lit the darkness. Plasma hissed through the vines, carving tunnels of vapor and smoke. The air filled with the stench of burning chlorophyll and alien sap. I watched in awe, in horror, as the humans moved like parts of a single organism, shouting positions, adjusting fire lanes, coordinating strikes. No panic, no hesitation, just motion, precision. Mackenzie was at the center of it all, calm, still, directing the storm. And then silence, abrupt, total. The vines stopped, shriveled, retreated. What was left behind wasn't a battlefield. It was a message. Zornia had tested us, and we had passed, barely. The following morning, I stood outside with the black suits. The ground still steamed. Ash and shredded roots lay scattered across the clearing like spilled intestines. The forest had pulled back just enough to let us breathe again. Mackenzie approached. She didn't speak, just stood beside me, watching the horizon. After a moment, I broke the silence. Do you think it's over? She shook her head. It never is. We watched the forest sway. The wind maybe, or something deeper. I turned to her again. Why do you keep coming back? She didn't answer right away. Then, because someone has to. That was all. But it was enough. In that moment, I understood. Humans don't explore because it's easy. They don't brave death worlds for glory or curiosity alone. They do it because someone has to. Because there are questions that need answers. Because there are dangers no one else will face. Because they can, and because they choose to. Back aboard the shuttle that retrieved us later that day, I watched the Zornian landscape shrink beneath us. The mountains, the forests, the scars we'd left behind. It all seemed smaller from above. But I knew the truth. Zornia was not small. It was vast, unforgiving, relentless. But so were the humans, and that terrified me more than the planet ever could. Because for all its fury, Zornia acted on instinct. The humans? They chose it. They walked into the jaws of monsters not because they didn't feel fear but because they did. And kept walking anyway. I returned to the orbital station a changed Amia. I had no new limbs, no new scars, only memories. But my understanding of the galaxy had shifted. There are beasts. Yes, there are monsters. But the most dangerous creature I've ever met walks on two legs, wears a blank expression, and carries fire in their hands. And they call themselves human. The shuttle's engines still roared in my ears long after we broke atmosphere. Even through the pressure of acceleration and the hiss of sealed suits, I couldn't shake the silence of what we'd left behind. I sat in my return pod, eyes locked on the viewport, watching the atmosphere shrink into a halo. Below, Zornia coiled beneath us still, unblinking. A creature too big to understand, too old to care. It didn't mourn the predator we killed. It didn't rage at the flames we left behind. It simply waited, waiting to see if we'd return. And I knew we would. That wasn't bravado. That was certainty. A fact etched in human nature deeper than language or science or war. They always return. The Amia station came into view. Sleek, pristine, safe, orbiting high above the horrors of the jungle world like a god watching from Olympus. But I didn't feel safe here. Not anymore. Inside the debriefing chamber, I was expected to give my report, present findings, share samples, display data, and pretend that was the most important thing I brought back. But I wasn't ready. Not yet. Instead, I found myself staring at my reflection in the polished surface of the station walls. Same eyes, same skin, same feathers tinged with the colors of home. But I wasn't the same. Something in me had shifted, cracked open, and I hadn't yet decided whether I wanted to patch it or let it stay broken. The official reports began to circulate. ZCO83 and ZCO84 were cataloged, new flora identified, soil samples sent for chemical decomposition. The data was groundbreaking, but the real subject of interest wasn't the planet. It was the humans. Every question the consortium asked came back to them. How did their suits resist the acid spores? Why did their weapons work so well on adaptive muscle tissue? How did they coordinate without visible commands? And why didn't they fear death the way other species did? I was ordered, really, to give lectures on human behavior, as if I were suddenly the foremost expert on a species I still didn't understand. I complied. I described their discipline, their resilience, their silence. But each time I finished, I felt like I'd only spoken half the truth, because how do you explain a creature that smiles while surrounded by monsters? How do you chart courage that borders on indifference? How do you measure what happens to a soul that sees death not as a threat, but as a constant companion? The more I spoke of them, the less I understood them, and yet, I couldn't stop thinking about them. 3 cycles passed before they invited me back. Another mission, joint expedition. This time, deeper. The humans wanted to establish a semi-permanent outpost near the base of the Eastern Massif where the scanner had picked up anomalous geothermal readings. Something was stirring in the depths, something the humans found curious, dangerous, exciting. I should have said no, but I didn't. My reputation had changed. No longer just a scientist, now a veteran, an insider, one of the few Amia who'd walked with them, survived beside them, watched them kill. I was assigned to new assistants. They looked at me with a mixture of awe and terror. I recognized that look. I had once worn it myself. The humans welcomed me back without ceremony. Mackenzie was there, still scarred, still silent, but when she looked at me now, there was something else in her eye. Recognition, respect, maybe even something colder. Expectation. She handed me a data slate. No speeches, no instructions, just coordinates. We launched the next morning. The second expedition was worse. We didn't encounter a single predator for the first 4 days, which was precisely what terrified us. Zornia doesn't lie dormant unless it's planning something. The scanner chirped endlessly with signals we couldn't identify: tremors beneath the soil, heat pulses through root systems, chemical changes in the air. Something below was awakening. The deeper we went, the stranger it became. Trees began growing in spiral formations, curving around invisible axes. Rocks bore carvings not made by erosion, fractals, repeating patterns. The deeper we descended into the Massif's shadow, the more it felt like we were walking into the mouth of something that had been asleep for eons, and we had just stepped on its tongue. The air shimmered, suits began reacting oddly, telemetry flickered, visors glitched. Words distorted, not errors. Interference. Organic interference. Zornia was adapting to us. Learning. By the time we reached the geothermal source, even the black suits were unsettled. No jokes, no mutters, just watchful, breath-held silence, and in the hollow beneath the rocks, we found it, not a creature, a heart, beating, pulsing, a vast, root-entangled organ, bigger than the rover itself, suspended inside a chamber that had no ceiling, no walls, just endless vines descending from blackness. It wasn't the heart of a beast. It was the heart of the planet, and we had awakened it. We barely escaped with our lives. The return journey was a blur of blood and fire. I remember running, screaming, watching one of my assistants vanish beneath a tide of thorns that moved like water. The humans didn't retreat, they advanced. To hold the line. To buy us time. Mackenzie was the last to return to the shuttle, covered in sap, bleeding, still calm. She sat beside me, silent as we broke orbit again. I looked at her and asked, "Why do you keep doing this?" She turned her head slowly, voice like gravel, "To understand what we are." I didn't ask what she meant, because deep down, I knew, humans don't conquer to dominate. They don't explore to map. They do it to know, to uncover the truth of things, even if that truth is horrifying, even if it changes them forever. I no longer wonder what makes them different. I wonder if the galaxy is ready for what they're becoming, because Zornia changed them, not by killing them, but by surviving them. Now, as I orbit high above the monster's world again, I see two threats, Zornia, and the humans who keep walking into its jaws, and walking back out stronger.